If there's one person who could be accurately described as a darling of YouTube, it would be CGP Grey. Epitomising the sort of fun history teacher vibe, he's accrued a massive following of almost 5 million subscribers at time of recording, and according to Patreon's own blog, is one of his top earners, gathering annual 6-figure amounts of money, and this isn't even including things like sponsorships, AdSense, or even the other Patreon accounts for his podcasts. However, I'm not the first to take issue with Grey and his work, and some cracks have certainly started to form in his previously unassailable reputation. Sean, for example, recently took aim at his infamous royal family video, and from there he started slowly gaining more and more critical scrutiny. I personally first took issue with him whilst doing research for my video about the politics of piracy of the high seas over on my politics channel, and I realised that he had simplified the life of the average pirate down to the point where it was functionally incorrect, but more on that in a moment. See, what Grey does a lot of the time is simply read a book and then make an animated 5 to 10 minute summary of it without being 100% clear that that's what he's doing. Disappointing though this is, this approach does give him plausible deniability to claim that it's not his fault if the book was wrong, he was just relaying the information. In my opinion, this is a bullshit cop-out excuse, and I'm not buying the shit he's trying to sell me with it. Grey has yet to present a video on a book he disagrees with, and on his podcasts does explicitly discuss the books he covers relatively frequently in a positive light. I guess I should probably make my biases when it comes to Grey clear. Back before I was a fully fledged leftist soy boy cuck, but after I stopped being a based red-pilled rightoid logic brain genius, I was a feckless lib who loved the pop educational faux intellectualism of your Kurzgesagts, your Brady Harrons, and your CGP Greys because, well, information and facts can't be biased and or misleading, can they? You really think someone would do that? Go on the internet and tell lies? I've listened to a lot of the first couple of years of his podcast Hello Internet, and I was genuinely a big fan for a long time. Now, whilst this video is primarily going to be about bad history, it does need to be said that Grey is, as far as I can see, some kind of liberal, and as such often his commentary, both historical and otherwise, is rather tinged by his essential inability or unwillingness to question certain parts of the status quo, and his reluctance to consider perhaps more left-wing solutions or points of view reveals a huge blind spot. In short, the work of CGP Grey plainly demonstrates the limitations of liberalism, and even if Grey was infallible, his work would seriously suffer from this, but as we'll see, his work is far from infallible and is often actively misleading in a number of ways. To demonstrate why I believe that CGP Grey is an incredibly bad historian and also disconnected Reddit liberal and or libertarian with very little empathy, I'll be covering the following videos and critiquing and correcting the errors and blind spots where I see them. 1. How to be a pirate, both Captain and Quartermaster editions. 2. Americapox, the Missing Plague, and Zerber vs. Horses Animal Domestication. 3. 7 Ways to Maximize Misery, and 4. Humans Need Not Apply. You may notice that it's about half and half history to politics and philosophy, and that's because I think it's important to acknowledge that when it comes to stuff like this, the two cannot be separated, as well as to start this channel as I mean to continue it, acknowledging that I approach history from a left-wing perspective, but trying to remain fair and accurate, avoiding unnecessarily injecting politics into situations that doesn't belong wherever possible. The Reddit level philosophy videos are posted on the same channel by the same guy in the same vein as the history ones, and the same ideological vein carries through them all, so in my opinion it does merit discussion. Without further ado, let's get into it. Long-time followers of my work over on my politics channel will probably be aware by now that pirates are my whole thing. I love pirates, I consume every piece of pirate media I can get my hands on, and I have various different pirate-themed items of clothing around my house, as well as a giant fuck-off skull and crossbones flag in my bedroom, along with a bunch of other flags. I'm one of those flag wankers, for which I can only apologise. And of course, a few months ago I put out an hour-long video about the politics and philosophy of piracy of the high seas. So, of course, I watched this video as soon as I could. Now, look, don't get me wrong, most of the information imparted in in the video, which, like most CGP Grey videos, is essentially just a summary of a book, this time The Invisible Hook, The Hidden Economics of Pirates by Peter T. Leeson, though as we're talking about the video and the video is just a summary of the book, I'll be referring to the video rather than the book here, is a broadly correct if a little oversimplified and ideologically slanted. See, both the book and the video frame the act of piracy as a form of business, with its own branding, hierarchy, employment contracts, and so on.
So how does this work exactly? If you'd like to be a pirate, you need to understand it is a business. You can't have a crew or a ship or a brand without a business model to support them. But pirate business is like any other. Make a product or provide a service to your customers in exchange for money, then spend that money on equipment and personnel to make more product for more customers for more money. The difference with Piracy Incorporated is our customers don't wish to be serviced. No matter, with the correct spending on equipment and personnel, the business will service them regardless.
Now, whilst this is certainly a fun way to present these ideas, in my opinion, it's rather misleading for a number of reasons. Firstly, of course, most pirate captains and quartermasters were elected by the crew and could be deposed just as easily, unlike just about any other business, which Gray does acknowledge, though he refers to it as an economic inevitability rather than what it is, an inevitable consequence of the abuses of power above naval and merchant ships, and arguably a precursor to the modern day idea of a worker co-op. After all, taking more democracy into the workplace is a goal of many left-leaning people and movements to this day, and frankly, what comes closer to the workers owning the means of production than pirates democratically owning and operating their ships, and is further away from the capitalist idea of private property. Likewise, when we take a look at the shares of booty pirates would often take, Gray boils the whole process down to,
as a crewman on a pirate ship, you are not paid in wages, but with one share of the profit, same as every crewman. The captain gets 2 shares for the strategic decisions he makes, the quartermaster 1 1/2 for his labors, the surgeon 1 1/4, same for the carpenter.
Which is a gross oversimplification of the way things actually worked, varied from ship to ship, and the estimation Gray uses is close to and probably based on the ship's articles of Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, though it omits the many other members of ship's crew who received similar or equivalent shares. Roberts' gunner, for example, received 1.5 shares as well as conveniently ignoring the existence of privateers and buccaneers and their role in this so-called economic niche. Gray frames the average pirate as having a specific personality type and or being someone who yearns for adventure.
Now, at the dawn of this new century, a lot of men are qualified to be crew, which means the cost of their labor is low. So you're not going to pay me much? You misunderstand. That you are here tells me you are not interested in traditional employment, working 9 to 5 on a ship of the Empire for minimum wage, staying out of trouble and saving for retirement as banal days pass, eroding the dreams and aspirations of your younger self, leaving you at the end to wonder how it all slipped away. No, your personality matrix, shaped entirely by your genetics and your environment, tend you to engage in risk-taking. What's genetics? Doesn't matter. Given your situation, you find being an outlaw with the possibility of great riches under the threat of the Empire's noose a risk worth considering.
But frankly, this often wasn't the case. Most pirates, including, it is speculated by some historians, Blackbeard himself, were simply out-of-work privateers, basically pirates that one empire would pay to harass the ships of another, or else merchant ship crews who mutinied and seized the means of production, the ship, for themselves. Likewise, many pirates were escaped slaves, like Black Caesar, famous pirate and ally of Blackbeard himself. LGBTQ+ people, including, though this is primarily speculation, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, as well as Black Bart himself, and others who wouldn't really fit in with mainstream society or on naval ships. Piracy was a promise of freedom for those unable to fit into polite society, as demonstrated by the dream of Libertalia, which, though ANCAPs may claim it as some kind of libertarian paradise, was nothing like the Randian idea of Galt's Gulch. But what was the dream of Libertalia? Well, in the second volume of A General History of the Pirates, published 1728, Captain Charles Johnson tells the tale of Captain Mission and his pirates, who established a utopian republic on the island of Madagascar. They called it Libertalia, where society would be based on the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Mission's pirates were determined to guard the common people's rights, fight the power of monarchies, and allow people to make and judge their own own laws and elect and rotate their leaders. They chose a council without distinguishing between nationality or race. They opposed labour and condemned slavery. Crucially, they had no deep respect for private property or business dealings. The tale goes that Mission and his men integrated slaves from captured ships into their society as well. Libertalia as a place almost certainly never really existed other than in legend, and reflected in the values of the attempted pirate republic in Nassau, existing primarily as a utopian dream, epitomizing the values held by many pirates for freedom and equality, in direct opposition to those of the Empire. The idea of Libertalia was beloved of many but hated and feared by the British ruling classes, contributing to the ruthless and brutal quashing of pirates throughout much of the 18th century. Such was the threat of even the idea of an independent pirate republic to the forces of order and power. And then there's the branding thing.
Hello! So you want to be a pirate, my lad? Well, let me tell ye, being a pirate be all about branding. Yar, it's a business, but branding be bringing in the booty, and if ye be shipping with our jolly crew, ye need love this Jolly Roger.
I don't know, it seems kind of weird to me, like, yeah, okay, I guess you can call the black flag and the infamous reputation of piracy branding, but if you were going to do that, then the same logic would naturally apply to the flags of the British, Spanish and Portuguese empires, as well as organisations like the East India Company, right? But also branding isn't unique to businesses or even capitalism. Symbols like this are also branding. Likewise, you could say the same about the fearsome reputation of the British Navy flying this flag, but I admit that this is just a nitpick and mostly not a big deal, just a minor issue with the decision to discuss piracy through a capitalist framework. Oh, and one final thing, Gray makes a big deal about having to dock at pirate-friendly ports for repairs and puts up this map showing a ship going from the UK to the Caribbean, but most pirates didn't actually sail from Britain, they mostly lived and thrived in the Caribbean or elsewhere, since they were usually trying to get away from Britain, where they could be caught and killed for desertion or, well, piracy, and that's where most of the booty was to be found. Hence why Libertalia and Nassau were so attractive to pirates. They represented freedom from the tyranny of the empires, yes, but also from the persecution of pirates, many of whom had committed crimes such as desertion, escape from slavery, homosexuality, and so on, and would be harshly punished by the crown had they been caught. Gray neglects to mention any of this, instead reducing it down to, some people are just naturally drawn to piracy because they're rebellious, and seemingly ignores the deeper and arguably more interesting philosophy and, well, history of piracy, which is quite disappointing. Before we get into this one, I should probably note that Gray has said that the overt praise for this book in the ad read at the end of the video is some kind of troll, but he has utterly failed to really criticise it in any meaningful way, so for now I'm not going to take that at face value. So this video, or I guess series of 2 videos, is a very interesting case study, not because of the actual information provided within it, but because of the source from which that information comes. See, Gray, like many definitely not accidentally casually racist people who would have voted for Obama for a 3rd time if they could, is a great believer in the theory of environmental determinism, made famous by Jared Diamond's rather infamous piece of pseudo-history, Guns, Germs and Steel, that got all the Reddit nerds horny for the natural superiority of the Western culture at the turn of the 21st century, and has continued to fascinate since. In brief, the book argues that whilst the West may not have been genetically superior, the environmental factors present in Europe do explain the hegemony of Europeans. Well, actually he lumps in Asia as well, calling it Eurasia, despite mostly focusing on Europe, thus conveniently allowing him to use Asian innovations and historical successes to argue in favour of European hegemony, so he's definitely not racist. Oh, and also he fails to acknowledge that this theory is pretty fucking useless and oversimplified when looked at by someone who actually understands history. Diamond, after all, was a geographer, not a historian, but he still felt the need to comment on history without doing adequate research or showing the book to a historian who studied the various cultures he disparages. The main arguments Diamond makes are as follows. 1. South America and Africa have less domesticated animals and thus are both prevented from progressing as a society much beyond hunter-gatherers and less susceptible to disease, thus did not grow immune to plagues carried by livestock. So when they were exposed to them, it decimated the population. 2. The natural east to west trade routes of Eurasia allowed for crops to be transported, and the similar climate and cycle of seasons let them keep the same food production system. They could keep growing the same crops and raising the same animals all the way from Scotland to Siberia. Doing this throughout history, the Eurasians were able to spread innovations, languages and diseases in a way that the Native Americans and Africans simply were not. Thus, division of labour was easier and more effective, paving the way for so-called higher civilization. A lot can be said about Guns, Germs and Steel, and indeed a lot has. I'm not going to go too in depth on the enormous failures of the book. Plenty of people, both on the left and right, have come out and picked really large holes in the narrative the book pushes, and I'll link a few of them in the description if I remember, but suffice to say that this theory only actually makes sense if you don't know that much about world history, or ironically geography, and also believe that the entire continents of Africa and South America are monolithic, a tendency I've spoken about before that we in the West often sadly perpetuate out of ignorance. For example, the idea that Africa and the Americas have a north-south orientation is quite frankly bullshit, because the map projection most commonly used actually makes Africa, the second largest continent by both population and landmass, look much narrower than it actually is. Likewise, the idea that the Sahara and varying climates prevented Africans from trading with Europeans or Asians is simply untrue. In fact, African trade is well established throughout history, both within Africa and with the northern continents, as are vast, complex African societies dating back hundreds if not thousands of years. South America, though trade with other continents wasn't really possible, wasn't quite the way Diamond describes it either. On multiple occasions, Diamond takes the colonizers at their word when uncritically regurgitating their obvious lies about how superior the mighty Spaniards were than the native Aztec population, and he neglects to mention that whilst the New World diseases were indeed devastating to the native populations, the colonizers did their absolute best to deliberately spread the diseases as far as possible as well, instead acting like the colonizers were purely innocent of the spread of disease and the imperial nations were simply acting rationally in response to their natural superiority over the native peoples. In the words of critics, halfway through teaching Guns, Germs and Steel, I blurted out that it was academic porn. The costumes changed, the props changed, but in the end it's the same repeated theme. Diamond's account makes all the factors of European domination a product of a distant and accidental history and has almost no role for human agency, the ability people have to make decisions and influence outcomes. Europeans become inadvertent, accidental conquerors. Natives succumb passively to their fate. Jared Diamond has done a huge disservice to the telling of human history. He has tremendously distorted the role of domestication and agriculture in that history. Unfortunately, his storytelling abilities are so compelling that he has seduced a generation of college-educated readers. Whilst it is interesting and important to ask why technology is developed in some countries as opposed to others, I think it overlooks a fundamental issue, the inequality within countries as well as between them. Guns, Germs and Steel lets the West off the hook and poisonously whispers mope about colonialism, slavery, capitalism, racism and predatory neo-imperialism all you want, but these were and are nobody's fault. This is a wicked cop-out. It basically says non-Western cultures and societies are sort of pathetic, but bless their hearts they couldn't and can't help it. Gray conveniently forgets to acknowledge these criticisms of the book, or even really mentioning them at all, despite the fact that he makes very clear elsewhere exactly where he got these ideas from, as well as basically just uncritically making a fun, bite-sized, digestible version of this bad, extremely misleading, Eurocentric pseudo-historical book. Oh, and also he calls Native Americans American Indians for some reason. This is a common thread and a very interesting theme throughout Gray's YouTube career. He'll read a book and then make a fun little animated summary of it without acknowledging or going out of his way to mention that that's what he's doing. He'll present it as fact despite the glaring errors which he refuses to acknowledge or mention in the video, and when criticised he can just retreat back into the "but it's not my opinion, it's just this book that I'm uncritically presenting as fact. It's not my fault that the author got it wrong, I was just repeating the information I was given." Yeah, okay, sure buddy. Once again, here Gray demonstrates his uncanny ability for summarising books he's read without critically analysing or thinking about the implications contained within. This time the book is How to Be Miserable 40 Strategies You Already Use, though obviously he condenses the book down to what he deems to be the most important 7. Both the book and the video are really quite clever ideas to take the opposite approach to most self-help books, and rather than telling you what to do to achieve some end goal, ironically telling you what not to do. Unlike with Guns, Germs and Steel, I'm not going to be really going after the author, Randy Patterson, who seems like your bog standard corporate productivity and life coach type, who spends most of his time going around advising rich people how to be productive, that sort of thing. This is pretty on brand for Gray, who, going from the episodes of Hello Internet I listened to at the time, is a big fan of self-help bullshit. There is the issue of him being an antidepressant skeptic. He seems to be one of those just go outside and be productive rather than being depressed people from what I've seen of his YouTube channel and website, but at least he's not pushing the same kind of pseudo-history as Diamond, so that's something, I guess. Anyway, there are a number of issues with the ideas discussed in the book, and therefore also the video, that others online, and especially in the Amazon reviews, have found, many of which are, in my opinion, completely valid. I guess first of all we should go over which 7 of the 40 chapters Gray chooses, and then ask ourselves why, as well as discuss the potential pitfalls of these ideas. So they are as follows. 1. Stay still. 2. Screw with your sleep. 3. Maximize your screen time. 4. Use your screen to stoke your negative emotions. 5. Set vapid goals. 6. Pursue happiness directly, and 7. Follow your instincts. Notice a theme. Yeah, these are things that the average person has little to no real control over within our economic system. Let's say you're an economically insecure millennial in a dead-end office job, which is most millennials these days. Likely, you live in a shared rented house or a bedsit. You spend most of your time in your room because it's the only place you really get privacy or time to yourself, or else at work, possibly with dodgy hours for little to no compensation. Seems kind of classist, right? I don't actually take issue with all of these. In fact, things like pursue happiness directly and follow your instincts is usually fine as these things go, but the rest are, well, not ideal, in my opinion. Allow me to explain point by point.
First, stay still. Remain indoors as much as possible, preferably in the same room. Be the human equivalent of a pile of laundry. Inert, unmoving. Don't let a beautiful day tempt you for a walk. Avoid anything even vaguely exercisial. This keeps reward chemicals out of your brain, which could divert you, and stillness guides you towards medical problems, which will keep this wheel turning. Stillness is the most effective thing you can do. So be the laundry pile. Make your bedroom your all room. Live and work and play and sleep in the smallest radius you can.
Gray coins this idea of the all room, where you spend your entire life, and suggests varying your environment, but not everyone is able to do that, Disabled people, for example, often are forced to stay still and are unable to vary their environment without assistance, and honestly, a lot of poor people may not have more than one room to really exist in anyway. And let's not get to the fact that all work is, for many people, is just being forced to exist in a single room for 8 hours a day, but Gray frames this as a choice, which is pretty fucked up if you ask me. He did eventually walk this one back after the pandemic hit, but the original video still stands with no corrections or caveats on it, so honestly, he may as well have just not bothered.
Screw with your sleep. The Wraith of Insomnia will be your co-pilot on the sea of sadness. Her mere presence is unpleasant, but she also helps confuse the productive part of your brain, which might look to navigate you toward the islands of happiness on the horizon. More on that later. A regular sleep cycle is a fragile thing and takes at least 3 days to establish. Be sure then to vary your bedtime by several hours twice a week at least. Even better, vary your wake times. Sleep in late, preferably very late, some but not all days. Tell yourself you are making up for sleep to feel like you're doing something healthy, even though you feel terrible when you wake up early and when you wake up late. Irregular sleep is another of the sea's accelerating currents. The more you vary your sleep, the harder regular sleep becomes, which makes your sleep more variable. To never sleep or wake at the same time naturally is the goal.
Likewise, with your sleep pattern, it's kind of weird that this is not qualified or even really spoken about at all outside of try not to sleep weird hours lol, which again is a privilege many working class people simply do not have. Sure, someone who works 9 to 5 may have a more regular sleeping pattern, but what about shift workers? I'm sure everyone has had a job that requires you to get up at different times every day due to dodgy shift patterns, but again, Gray frames this as a personal choice. Those dumb pricks, why don't they just sleep normal?
And to help in this, maximize your screen time. Staying on screen complements the previous sailing tactics. Boredom could drive you to motion, so let the screen entertain you. Tiredness can push you to sleep, so let the screen keep you awake, sort of, as long as possible. Always fall asleep with a screen in your hand and put your eyes back on it as soon as you wake. Every moment away from a screen is a moment you might notice the horizon. Keep your head down and let the currents pull you. Here you have allies unknown. Behind the screen are teams of the smartest people and brightest bots competing to hold your attention on them as long as possible. Let them reach you, to pull you back if you turn away.
This one is quite sneaky really, because whilst Gray does acknowledge that there are bots and algorithms specifically designed to get people addicted to social media and screen usage, he fails to place the blame on the people and companies doing this, instead being like, nah, just don't go on Twitter, bro. Likewise, he doesn't really talk about the fact that as more and more jobs move onto the digital space, people are required to stare at screens with minimal breaks for at least 8 hours a day for work anyway, and as more and more of our life outside of work moves towards screen usage as well, this is not at all really a personal choice. Sure, don't use your phone before bed, whatever, but what about the fact that if you don't stare at a screen for most of your waking hours, you'll be fired and unable to pay bills or survive? Nah bro, just stop scrolling Instagram so much.
Plus, screens help with number 4. Use your screen to stoke your negative emotions, to feed your anger or anxiety about things over which you have no control or influence. Be well informed while doing nothing. The things you care about could be navigational guides out of the sea, reasons to leave your allroom and take meaningful action with the humans around you. But you can instead use the things you care about as further sources of misery. Focus on the bad to fuel your resentment or despair. If you must contribute, do so only in meaningless token ways and be disappointed in the lack of change.
This one I kinda agree with, but once again, Gray fails to acknowledge the complexity and nuance. People don't usually go out of their way to seek out negativity, they have it thrust upon them, either because the news constantly reports depressing stories or just because the world in which we live can be a harsh, depressing place. It's a sad fact that often being informed and aware about what's going on in the world necessarily means that you'll be exposed to a significant amount of frustration, anger, and yes, misery. But what's the alternative? Ignore it? Pretend it isn't happening? We on the left get this all the time, of course. You lefties are always so fucking miserable. Why can't you look on the bright side for once? And the answer, of course, is that in order to buy into leftism, you have to become aware of and come to terms with the inequalities and injustices inherent within the systems of neoliberalism and capitalism. As the slogan goes, if you're not angry, you've not been paying attention. But nah, ignore injustices. Being aware of them just makes you sad, so pretend they're not happening.
We're coming towards the end, and if you're doing it right, misery is descending. But some part of your brain is rebelling, trying to turn the ship by setting a goal. If you're not careful, that part of your brain just might save you. But luckily, we can do more than just hobble it. We can fool it to navigate deeper into the sea. To reach goals, they must be specific, measurable, actionable, for which you are responsible and time-bounded. I will turn the wheel 1 degree right now. Instead, set the productive part of your brain on vapid goals. Vague, amorphous, pie-in-the-sky, irrelevant, delayed. Make the target unclear and the path unclear. If motivation strikes, aim ridiculously high to guarantee failure. I will clean the whole house today is much better than I will do the laundry in this pile. Cleaning a whole house is impossible. There's always more to do, so you will always fail. Focus on goals that are after what you wish to achieve. Learn how to market an app before you learn to code. This will distract the productive part of your brain quite nicely. And be sure to wait for motivation rather than setting a time. You'll do something when you feel like it, which will be never or never enough to matter. With vapid goals, you will turn the productive part of your brain from a dangerous source of self-improvement that rewards every small step into a consistent nag that berates you for your failure to have already accomplished your goal every step of the way.
This is just plain old self-help bullshit. Like, yeah, sure, set achievable goals, okay then, but in what context? Housework? Work? Organising a glorious workers' revolution? I don't know, at this point just sounds like weird productivity gospel bullshit, to be honest, and I don't really have much to say about it other than to note that it's really rather telling that Gray has a pattern of seeming to equivocate happiness with productivity, which just so happens to align with neoliberal aspirational bullshit, especially easy for a successful self-employed man to say, and reflects the toxic aspirations of what I like to call the cult of hustle.
Mama need a house, baby need some shoes, times are getting hard, guess what I'ma do, hustle, hustle, hustle.
Can you tell yet that a majority of these videos are written from the perspective of a rich self-employed Reddit-using Elon Musk fan? Well, if not, the final video we're going to be covering today will help demonstrate what I mean. And finally, we get to Gray's best video, in my opinion. Genuinely thought-provoking, interesting, and well-researched. I don't really have a point with the actual contents of this video so much as the ideological implications and apparent unwillingness to really deal with the problems at hand. In essence, this video represents the liberal tendency to raise a problem with the status quo without really considering the most obvious and ethical solutions. You see this sort of thing all the time when it comes to climate change, of course. The planet is going to boil and kill us all unless we do something drastic very quickly, and those with the power to do so don't seem particularly enthusiastic to affect change in any tangible way, and so now we have to consider the very real possibility that the human race will be wiped out due to the incentives and market forces inherent to neoliberal capitalism unless we take action now. The solution many point to, of course, is to end capitalism and implement a system focused more towards sustainability, compassion and empathy as a desperate last-ditch attempt to save humanity from the coming climate apocalypse. Or, to put it another way, the argument is that we're being forced to choose between socialism and barbarism, and depressingly, it looks like we've chosen extinction over giving healthcare to working class people. Honestly, from watching this video, you can really see Gray's Musk worship start to shine through a little as he talks about how great it is that human labour will be made significantly easier and we can head towards a sort of Star Trek-esque future thanks to the great innovators of our age who definitely started up their own companies rather than buying the title of founder, wouldn't take billions in government subsidies despite LARPing as a libertarian, crush union membership, place workers in physical danger, causing numerous injuries that could have been avoided, and made an indestructible truck that breaks incredibly quickly. Oh, and also Musk called the guy who saved kids from almost certain death a pedo, because that's just what super geniuses do, I guess.
This video isn't about how automation is bad, rather that automation is inevitable. It's a tool to produce abundance for little effort. We need to start thinking now about what to do when large sections of the population are unemployable through no fault of their own. What to do in a future where, for most jobs, humans need not apply.
Anyway, throughout the video, Gray seems both incredibly optimistic that these new automations will improve the lives of everyday people. If only we knew how to make a society function without forcing everyone into shitty jobs. Too bad that's not something anyone has ever considered before, eh? Of course, I'm just being facetious here. In truth, there's a number of solutions that have been proposed over the years, and frankly, the idea that anyone could be so narrow-minded as to posit that we'll just find new jobs, as Gray suggests, is really quite depressing.
But if you still think new jobs will save us, here is one final point to consider. The US Census in 1776 tracked only a few kinds of jobs. Now, there are hundreds of kinds of jobs, but the new ones are not a significant part of the labor force. Here's the list of jobs ranked by the number of people who perform them. It's a sobering list with the transportation industry at the top. Continuing downward, all of this work existed in some form 100 years ago, and almost all of them are easy targets for automation. Only when we get to number 33 on the list is there finally something new. Don't think that every barista or white-collar worker need lose their job before things are a problem. The unemployment rate during the Great Depression was 25%. The list above is 45% of the workforce.
Let's talk about division of labour and the necessity of work then. Why do we work? That's a question that needs to be asked, and I actually did make a video about this a while ago on my politics channel, but the simple answer under capitalism is to survive. After all, it's not like we have much of a choice, right? If we don't work, we die, or at least struggle. The fact that this is even a problem in the first place shows us that our current economic system is fucked. If your job is rendered obsolete by automating it, isn't that a good thing? It means we're getting closer to emancipating more and more people from work entirely, and under a fairer system, it would be acknowledged that a worker in such a position need not find another job because, well, it's not like another job has necessarily been created, right? There's one less job, so why add one more person to the unemployment line? But that's not the way it works. Capitalism requires a surplus of labour in order to drive wages down, and the idea of hard work is fetishized to the point where not working is seen as laziness, and a system that declares people like this fit for work, whilst also systematically eroding the institution of retirement benefit, is probably not one that would be willing to pay people to not work. Gray, sadly, fails to acknowledge the fact that most of the jobs that have been rendered obsolete or are undesirable for humans to carry out haven't necessarily disappeared, but have instead been outsourced to the third world. Sure, eventually automation will come for those jobs as well, but right now the pennies of electricity an hour that Baxter costs.
Meet Baxter. Unlike these things, which require skilled operators and technicians and millions of dollars, Baxter has vision and can learn what you want him to do by watching you do it. And he costs less than the average annual salary of a human worker. Unlike his older brothers, he isn't pre-programmed for one specific job. He can do whatever work is within the reach of his arms. Baxter is what might be thought of as a general-purpose robot, and general purpose is a big deal. Even if Baxter is slow, his hourly cost is pennies worth of electricity, while his meat-based competition costs minimum wage. A tenth the speed is still cost-effective when it's 100th the price. And while Baxter isn't as smart as some of the other things we will talk about, he's smart enough to take over many low-skilled jobs.
This is still more than the pittance companies pay to sweatshop workers and child labourers in the third world, and certainly a lot cheaper than the engineers who created him and the R&D required to make him marketable. The loss of jobs in the first world has been going on for a long time, and it's only recently that it's been to robots. For most of the past few decades, it's been to a different group of beings that we in the West see as less than human. People in the third world who we can outsource the shitty jobs we would be uncomfortable to see white people doing. The thing is, most jobs these days, even the ones in the West, are not really the ones that are important for the betterment of society. The whole capitalism breeds innovation meme is a whole thing nowadays, but in seriousness, it's simply a fact that we have too few teachers and nurses and underpay essential staff, praise essential workers who keep chugging on, risking their lives due to the lockdowns whilst not giving them a single pay rise, and spend more money on producing 1,000 different kinds of microwave over making basic necessities available to all who need them, cut school budgets whilst giving trillions to military projects, and so on. Capitalism breeds poverty and vapid, pointless tat, but not abundance and certainly not innovation. As that old poster points out, if you're employed, it's not because there isn't any work. Just look around. A housing shortage, crime, pollution. We need better schools and parks. Whatever our needs, they all require work, and as long as we have unsatisfied needs, there's work to be done. So ask yourself, what kind of world has work but no job? It's a world where work is not related to satisfying our needs, a world where work is only related to satisfying the profit needs of business. This country was not built by the huge corporations or government bureaucracies, it was built by people who work, and it is working people who should control the work to be done. Yet, as long as employment is tied to someone else's profits, the work won't get done. So what is my point here? Well, quite simply that much like world hunger, homelessness, etc., this problem simply cannot be adequately solved by neoliberal capitalism. Currently, we produce enough food to end world hunger permanently. We allow the rich to own and rent out empty homes to people rather than just seizing them and giving homes to people who need them, despite the fact that the amount of empty homes outnumber the total sum of homeless people, and of course we refuse to help people who are, as the video states, not unemployed or lazy, but increasingly unemployable, as automation takes over more and more jobs, reducing the amount of available work for everyone. Additionally, it's not like currently we really prioritize work that needs to be done over work that might help a capitalist make money. My job, for example, does literally nothing to improve the lives of my fellow people or contribute in any meaningful way to society, but it does pay better than jobs that do. I actually did work in food production for a while, a job that does actually need to be done to allow people to, well, eat, but it paid a pittance because that job made less money for my boss than my current job does. In all likelihood, the solution to the problem of automation, rather than implementing a system whereby people's basic needs are all accounted for and provided for free at the point of access, and transitioning to a more egalitarian society, restructuring capital and the priorities and incentives of the powerful towards actually making society better, will mean we'll probably get a shitty version of UBI, which barely covers our most basic necessities but placates us enough so we don't do a revolution and the rich can continue to make money at the expense of the poor. And this is what I mean by Gray's inability to really deal with the implications of his ideology, or rather lack of one. The answer to the problem of the new automation revolution is a choice between socialism and barbarism, but he can't really say that, so he has to kind of catastrophize. Here's a problem, but we don't know how to fix it. Oh no, how terrible. Anyway, look how cool Elon Musk is. I got to ride in a Tesla. Isn't that cool? I don't hate CGP Grey. I think a lot of his videos are really great, informative and entertaining, but I think it's clear that he has a bias, just as I do, and his political views often tend to colour his work in uncomfortable ways, which would be fine if he weren't operating a fun educational channel for all ages, or at the very least if he admitted it. Likewise, his inability to see leftist solutions as valid alternatives limit the scope of his work, in my opinion. Gray's videos are, whether intentional or not, neoliberal propaganda, occasionally libertarian leaning and and, well, very, very inaccurate when it comes to history. In my opinion, the main issue with Gray's work is that he tends to play it very safe, only rarely publishing a video that comprises of primarily his own ideas, preferring instead to either summarize or borrow heavily from a specific book he'd recently read, which, considering his personal preferences and interests, often ends up falling into a certain theme, shall we say. My main issue with Gray, however, is not only that he makes errors like this, or even that he implicitly pushes his personal politics in his work, but that he's never felt the need to do better. For example, he recently made a minor factual error in a video about a missile launch site, deleted the video, made a public apology, and re-uploaded a corrected version, and yet this is the only thing he has ever done this for. He's not done this for the true cost of the royal family video, even though we now know, thanks to that one Sean video, that is full of misleading information and outright badly researched pro-royalist nonsense, or any of the videos I've covered here. Now, of course, my issue with Gray arises primarily from the fact that I have particular interests and biases that conflict with his, but I think that this at the very least raises an interesting point about the limitations of liberalism as a philosophy, as well as a demonstration that even when you're one of the richest YouTubers in the world, when you have access to the expertise and skills of a team of people animating, researching, editing and so on, as well as the input of experts in the academic field you're talking about, you are not immune to mistakes, and unless you're extremely careful, you can very easily fall into the ideology trap, where you overlook or completely ignore information that either contradicts or doesn't support your hypothesis on a particular topic, or your deeply held personal and philosophical beliefs. You will constantly be overlooking potential solutions to the problems you discuss. I don't particularly expect to convince many CGP Grey fans, or the man himself, though I sincerely doubt he'll ever watch this video, and I don't blame him for that, but at the very least I hope I've shown you that there's more than one side to most topics, historical or philosophical, and if nothing else, it's my hope that you engage with so-called unbiased creators and sources in a critical manner rather than just taking them at face value, including myself. I have in the past unlisted or even deleted videos on my politics channel if there were bad enough errors in them, including some of my most viewed videos in fact, and I'm happy to do so because I want to be as accurate as possible in these videos whilst being completely open and honest about my biases. My hope is that you, the viewer, hold your favourite content creators to a similar standard. Hello, it's me, Captain Warbeard, Jeep in the Box, whatever you want to call me. Usually this is the part in the video where I would actually put like the credits with Patreon subscribers and things like that, but I'm not entirely sure what to do here on this channel, so I think for the first few videos I'm just not going to do that because I'm well aware that I will have people come over from my politics channel who will be watching this video. I imagine that's where the bulk of my viewers will be coming from, but also I do plan on making non-political or at least not explicitly political videos about history. So I do expect that a lot of people, even people who do want to contribute to my Patreon, may not want to contribute to my political videos, but may want to contribute to my history videos, or of course vice versa. So I'm not really sure what to do about this. I'll probably leave it blank for a while. I might set up a separate Patreon, I guess, for this channel if that's something people would want. Let me know, anyway. I hope you enjoyed this video, the first video on my new channel, apart from the channel intro, I guess. This is probably the most political one I'm going to make, because I did go into, like, half of the video wasn't actually about history. I did consider splitting it up and putting half on my other channel, but then it didn't really make sense to split it in half. So going forward, it probably won't be as heavily political. I'll probably still share my political point of view when it's relevant in these videos, but not in the way that I did in this video. This is more just sort of me trying it out, seeing what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. I think I worked out what needs to be done in this area, and I think one of the things that needs to be done is to stop being so overtly and sort of aggressively political on this non-political channel. So yeah, that's it. Let me know if you're a Patreon, what you'd like to do. Yeah. Bye.